are asking more and more questions about whether a new drug is worth its price or not. The reason is that the sales of any new drug all over the Western world depends upon whether the insurance companies are going to reimburse it or not. What kind of pressure does that put on the research community?
It puts a huge amount of pressure on the research community. I think that, as I've said to a couple folks today, I think the biggest challenge now for research in pharma is that many of the more straightforward diseases have been treated. So what you're left behind with is much more difficult diseases, either because it takes decades to develop, or there's not one mechanism, there's not one enzyme in someone's body that just goes haywire and causes a disease. So right away now, the easy stuff is done, you're left with hard things. You then have a regulatory environment and a payer's environment that says we only want truly differentiated drugs. So if Lipitor goes off patent, they're not going to take a drug which is just like Lipitor, does everything Lipitor does. They're just not going to approve it. We're not going to invest in that. So now you have to aim for the home runs now. You have to aim for the really breakthrough blockbuster drugs, and there's no room for me too. So now you have more difficult programs, they're harder to solve, and then there's a better than even chance they won't work. So that's the environment one is facing now. It's not all gloom and doom. I would say now, part of what we're focusing on is how do we help find what are those pathways that are important for the drug progression, the disease progression, and can we use our engine of small molecules, biologics, conjugates? We have quite an arsenal to apply against that, but we have to find out which pathway should we go after. And then after we find these wonderful drugs, we need to understand not every patient will respond to them. So how do you distill up those subset of patients who actually will respond to therapy? Is there some constellation of gene sequencing or protein expression that allow you to say this one will respond, this one won't? So you can actually increases the chance when you go to the payers to say that if you find patients that hit this profile, they have a higher than average chance of responding. Those kind of drugs they'll pay for. But I would say the job is a lot harder than it was when I started 20 plus years ago. And it only is going to get harder, but I do think the tools are getting more sophisticated. The partners we deal with are bringing a lot more expertise to the world. And that goes back to the reason why we can't try to have all this expertise in-house, because it's simply too broad a problem to solve. So we have to collaborate more with academics, biotech, hospitals, and so on.
Thank you, Dr. Connell. The floor is now open for questions. We have time for about 20 minutes time for that. Who would like to start? Yes, sir.
The CRO industries and you see the biotech industries and very clear demarcations, where you see that the entire innovative research coming or partnering with the biotech industries, and service industries, you are going for clinical research or preclinical. But 10 years back when you started, pharma companies started looking at East, they started looking at from chemistry and then biology a little bit. But you mentioned that going forward, the ecosystem is more going toward collaborative research, and which is more, I understand, is innovative research. So do you see that your expectations from India and China or this part of the world is to combine this CRO activities with the innovative research, what West was doing clearly in two different domains? So do you see that it's emerging here, where you combine both these activities in one kind of space, which is a CRO space?
Yes, I think it's a great point, JB. If you think about it, never mind Pfizer's ecosystem, but if you think about now a small biotech starting out today, a biotech starting out today 20 years ago would have had to build a building, they would have had to put chemistry hoods in, biology hoods in, and so on. And now what you have in most of the US and Europe is people who will call up a company in India or China, get some basic chemistry work done, some basic biology work done. They actually de-risk the business model before they get started. So now we get back to Pfizer. Pfizer and other big pharmas built all these costs already. And now what you're seeing is a recognition that we don't need to own all of these things that are not part of the innovative core when you don't need them 24/7. So I see on one hand, while we're seeking out partners who bring pure innovation into the process, we are also looking for CROs to bring pure capacity. Because we do live in what you call a peak and valley world, where sometimes we have a huge amount of need, but we only have a fixed amount of capacity in the business. and other times where we don't need all the capacity that we have because we just had a bad luck in the portfolio. So I do see many of the big multinationals now, aside from even outsourcing, they really are saying that, you know, in life there's only two things that are certain: death and taxes. And for an R&D engine, success is not guaranteed, good science is not guaranteed, but cost is guaranteed. So if you can't control the cost of your R&D engine, you're going to have trouble. So, you know, Sandeep may have some other thoughts on that, but from our point of view, I see this as a synergy even more close between CROs and all the other parts of the hospitals and biotechs with Big Pharma.
Thanks, Rick. I think Rick has covered it pretty much. So I can give you example of endopharma. For us, drug discovery and development is actually entirely collaborative. We do not control or have any major infrastructure. So I see the collaboration. Yes, the CROs do provide service, but I'm also constantly looking for innovation. So a number of collaborative partnerships we have built in India and also other parts of the world are focused on not only providing some of the essential services, but the major component of that is innovation and doing serious drug design, SAR exercise, developing assays and models, and answering pertinent questions which make a molecule druggable molecule. So the entire continuum of drug discovery, I think, is what you can now work with your partners and can do, and that's what we are doing essentially at Endo. So your question is fair. I think what is expected and what's going to be the way of future, the pure service will be there to some extent, but I think the major play will be probably in the risk share models and the innovation models where, you know, companies will come to you for your innovative capabilities as well as a little bit of, you know, fixed cost services.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, my question is by Big Pharma on generics as such, whether pure play generics or some modified formulations. For example, Lipitor has gone off patent. Somebody might come up, in fact, I run one of the formulation companies. So I might come up with a strategy where I could make it a better drug than what Lipitor was, a little bit modification, maybe a new formulation. So from a Big Pharma point of view, would you like to see that trend emerging? Especially Big Pharma was not interested in generic formulations, but now every Big Pharma has a generic arm and they've been making acquisitions in India. So let's go with this example of Lipitor. Somebody comes up with a novel formulation which offers various pharmacokinetic and dynamic additional advantages. And how do you see the regulatory framework for new formulations, especially these days, and what is the Big Pharma outlook on generics and new formulations of their blockbuster expiring drugs?
Yeah, so, but I would say, obviously, you know, Pfizer has a big established products division, and part of that, as we just saw a few months ago with Lipitor going off patent, it allows you, if you're successful, to sort of have more gentle loss of exclusivity in some ways. With regard to new formulations, you know, I think if there's one learning I have had, speaking to my friends in established products, is that innovation is defined in terms of new formulations by the payer, not by the producer. So if we think we have some control release, some topical solution, and we think we want to charge 2x or 3x or even 1.1x what a generic is, if the payers don't see the value in terms of reduced side effects, you know, higher compliance, they simply won't pay for that. So I think the key to doing innovations around formulations is doing whatever market surveys need to do with the payers to say, if we had a drug that had this level of efficacy with this level of side effects, and they said that would be a great drug, I think then you have a much more successful pathway. The problem is we tend to get smitten by our own intelligence. Oh, you know, this would be a great drug. I know people will pay for this, and they get very disappointed.
Big pharma's looking at repurposing, re-rescuing of molecules, or are they looking at some back translation work as well?
Yeah, so actually if people know the story of Viagra, Viagra was actually a cardiovascular drug that failed in the clinic, but it had this sort of interesting side effect that when they went to shut down the clinical trials, a lot of the patients asked for some additional samples. And that, you know, obviously the innovation for Pfizer was converting that side effect into $1 billion drug. So following that, that was a one-off case. And so Pfizer then said, actually, we have, between all the companies we've acquired, we have hundreds of both failed